On a chilly afternoon in a small town nestled between rolling hills and quiet streets, Emma was running her usual errand to the local pharmacy. She had a long to-do list for the day, starting with picking up a prescription for her grandmother, then grabbing groceries, and maybe even squeezing in a coffee with her best friend later. It was just an ordinary Tuesday. The sky was clouded, and the crisp autumn air hinted at the coming of winter. Emma had no idea that this unremarkable day was about to take a turn that would change the course of her life. As she entered the pharmacy, the bell above the door rang lightly, its sound almost musical in the quiet of the afternoon. The pharmacy was a small, local establishment, owned by Mr. Carter, a kindly man who had been running it for as long as Emma could remember. He knew the ins and outs of every regular customer, from their medical needs to their preferred brands of toothpaste. The shelves were stocked with every over-the-counter remedy imaginable, and the smell of antiseptic and mint lingered in the air. It was a place Emma had visited countless times, a comfortable part of her routine. She made her way to the counter where the pharmacy assistant, a young woman named Sarah, was busily typing away on the computer. Emma smiled and greeted her, but her attention was drawn to the line at the register, where an elderly man was fumbling with his wallet. He was hunched over, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to pull out enough cash to pay for his prescription. His face, lined with the marks of age, looked troubled. His clothes, though neat, had seen better days. A thick coat and worn shoes hinted at a life lived on a tight budget. Emma noticed that he seemed to be struggling, his fingers slow as they counted the bills with a visible lack of confidence. For a moment, Emma hesitated. She wasn't someone who often intervened in the lives of strangers, especially in a setting like this. Yet, something about the elderly man's vulnerability struck her. His difficulty with the simple task of paying for his medication felt like a small tragedy to her. As she watched, a sense of unease washed over her. He was doing his best, but the discomfort on his face grew. His hands trembled again as he set aside a few bills, seemingly unsure whether he had enough to cover the cost. The assistant behind the counter gave a polite but strained smile, clearly trying to be patient, but Emma could tell she was getting a bit flustered by the wait. There was a brief, uncomfortable silence before the man's voice broke through the air. "I'm so sorry. I think I'm a little short," he said, his voice soft but carrying a tone of defeat. He looked at the cashier, his eyes filled with uncertainty, as though he feared he was causing trouble. Emma's heart tightened. She knew exactly what it was like to feel helpless in a situation you couldn't control. Her mind raced. The man seemed embarrassed, his pride preventing him from asking for help. He seemed too proud to let others know he was struggling, and Emma found herself drawn to that quiet dignity. Her grandmother, whom she had visited just earlier that day, had always emphasized the importance of kindness and doing what you could for others. This felt like one of those moments, a quiet call to act. Without thinking, Emma stepped forward. She had no idea what possessed her at that exact moment, but as soon as she heard the elderly man's apology, she felt a deep instinct to do something. She reached into her purse, pulled out her card, and held it out to the assistant. The startled look on Sarah's face mirrored Emma's own surprise at what she was doing. "I'll cover the difference," she said softly, trying to sound casual, though her voice betrayed a mix of urgency and uncertainty. The elderly man turned to her, his eyes wide with surprise. He took a moment to register what was happening, his expression flickering between confusion and gratitude. His voice, though hoarse, was filled with emotion as he murmured, "Are you sure? You don't have to do this, dear." Emma smiled, feeling an odd warmth in her chest. "It's okay. Please, don't worry about it," she replied, her voice steady despite the sudden rush of feeling that came over her. "I'm happy to help." The assistant processed the transaction quickly, almost as if she were on autopilot, and handed the elderly man his medication. The man, still in a daze, clutched the bag tightly to his chest. He didn't know what to say. The gratitude in his eyes spoke volumes, but words seemed to fail him. After a few long moments of silence, he finally managed to say, "I can't thank you enough, young lady. You've no idea how much this means to me." Emma didn't need to hear the rest of his thanks. She could see it in his face, he was deeply moved, and so was she. There was no need for him to explain any further. As she turned to leave, she felt the familiar weight of her purse once again, but now, the world outside seemed just a little brighter. She had done something small, yet somehow, it felt like she had made a real difference, and that was enough. She waved goodbye to Sarah, who was still staring in disbelief, and stepped out into the crisp air. The world outside was still the same. People walked by, cars honked in the distance, and the usual bustle of town life continued as if nothing had changed. Yet, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Something had shifted. She hadn't expected anything in return for her small act of kindness. It had just felt right. She walked down the street, lost in thought, but as she crossed the intersection, a feeling of quiet contentment washed over her. She had done something good. Little did she know, that simple act of paying for an elderly man's prescription was only the beginning of a series of events that would unfold in ways she could never have imagined. What started as an ordinary Tuesday would soon lead her into a web of unexpected twists, challenges, and life-altering decisions. As Emma continued her walk through the town square, she didn't notice the old man standing by the corner, watching her from a distance. He hadn't moved from the pharmacy just yet. A faint smile curled on his lips, one that Emma couldn't see, but that would soon reveal itself in ways that neither of them could predict. Emma didn't know it at the time, but that moment would haunt her thoughts for days to come. She would begin to wonder, was there something more to this act than she realized? What would happen next? How would this one simple choice, this small, seemingly insignificant moment in time, end up changing everything? She had no way of knowing that later that evening, she would receive a phone call that would turn her world upside down. The following morning, Emma woke up with the same routine as usual. The sun was just beginning to break through the curtains, casting soft light on her small apartment. The smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen filled the air, a comfort she had come to rely on for years. It was a simple life, but one she had grown to love. In the hustle of her 9-to-5 job at a marketing agency, weekends spent hiking with friends, and evenings curled up with books, Emma found satisfaction in the little things. She had always been a creature of habit, and there was comfort in the predictable cadence of her days. But what happened the previous afternoon, a fleeting moment of kindness in a small pharmacy, was already starting to work its way into her thoughts. As she got ready for work, her mind kept wandering back to the elderly man she had helped. Mr. Harris, he had said his name was. The moment when she stepped in to pay for his prescription had seemed almost instinctive, like something she had to do. But she hadn't expected the deep sense of fulfillment that followed. It wasn't something she often felt. Maybe it was because it was so rare to experience the raw, human connection that came with helping a stranger, or maybe because the gesture felt pure, untainted by the need for recognition or reward. But as Emma put on her shoes and prepared to leave, something tugged at her heart. A voice in the back of her mind was telling her that she'd soon be called to do more, though at the time, she didn't know why she felt this way. At work, life went on as usual. The clients called, the emails flooded in, and Emma responded to requests with the same diligence she always did. But her mind kept wandering back to Mr. Harris. She found herself wondering about him, his life, his struggles, and the circumstances that had brought him to the pharmacy. She tried to imagine what it must have been like for him, standing there, unsure if he could afford the medication he needed. The thought of someone feeling so vulnerable made her uneasy. That's when she realized that, even though she had acted out of kindness, there was something more to it. A quiet voice inside told her that helping someone in such a genuine way had a ripple effect. And just like any stone tossed into a still pond, the waves of that simple action would spread far beyond what she could see. That evening, as she sat at her desk, checking her phone before heading home, the screen lit up with an unexpected call. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it gave her pause. For a brief moment, she debated whether or not to answer. It was late, almost 7 p.m., and she wasn't expecting any business calls. But a part of her felt the need to pick up, as though something significant was about to unfold. "Hello?" she answered, her voice tentative. "Good evening, is this Emma Collins?" The voice on the other end was warm, yet gravelly, with a hint of age that made her immediately recognize it. It was Mr. Harris. "Mr. Harris?" she asked, surprised. What can I do for you?" "I hope I'm not disturbing you, my dear," Mr. Harris said. "I just wanted to thank you again for your kindness at the pharmacy yesterday. I can't tell you how much it meant to me. I've been meaning to reach out, but the days have just slipped away." Emma smiled at his words, touched by his gratitude. "No need to thank me, Mr. Harris. It was nothing, really. I'm just glad I could help." There was a pause on the line. Emma could almost hear him thinking, weighing his words. "Well, that's just it, you see. You've helped me in more ways than you realize. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you for what you did, but there's something I need to tell you. Something important." The tone in his voice shifted, becoming more serious. Emma sat up straighter in her chair, instinctively sensing that this wasn't just a simple thank you call. "What do you mean, Mr. Harris?" He cleared his throat. "I don't expect you to believe me, but there's a connection here, Emma. You may not understand right now, but I hope you'll hear me out. I don't have anyone left in the world, you know. No family nearby, and the few relatives I have are distant at best. But I do have something to give, something that's been passed down in my family for generations. It's not much, but I want you to have it." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She thought about his words for a moment, unsure of what he was referring to. I don't know what you mean, Mr. Harris," she stammered. "You don't owe me anything. Really, I just did it because I could. You don't have to give me anything in return." The old man's voice softened. "I know you didn't do it for anything in return, Emma. But this isn't about a debt or owing anyone. It's about gratitude. It's about something I believe is meant to be." Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "What are you talking about?" "I don't have much, but a long time ago, my great-uncle, a man of some means, left me something. A small piece of land and some valuables. I've lived quietly, with little need for wealth. But now, well, I don't need it anymore. I've decided that you're the one who should have it. It's my gift to you, Emma. You'll find out more soon. I'll be in touch." Before she could respond, the line went dead. She sat there, stunned, staring at her phone in disbelief. What had just happened? The voice of Mr. Harris echoed in her mind, his words lingering in the air, like a riddle she couldn't quite solve. Land? Valuables? Her head was spinning. She spent the rest of the evening trying to process the conversation, but the more she thought about it, the more questions surfaced. Who was this man, really? Why would he want to give her something so valuable? And, more than anything, what did he mean by a connection? The phone call had left her with more confusion than clarity, and the more she pondered the situation, the more her gut told her that things weren't as simple as they seemed. There was something much bigger at play here, something that had begun the moment she made that small, impulsive decision to help a stranger. Emma had no way of knowing that this was just the beginning of a series of strange and unexpected events that would alter the course of her life. As the days passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that fate had somehow guided her to this point. And now, as she awaited the next step in this bizarre turn of events, she found herself standing on the precipice of something she couldn't yet understand, but which she would soon realize was far beyond anything she could have imagined. What was waiting for her at the other end of this strange path? Only time would tell. The days that followed Mr. Harris's phone call felt like a blur to Emma. At first, she tried to dismiss it as a misunderstanding or perhaps a result of the elderly man's loneliness. It was possible, she thought, that in his gratitude, he had gotten carried away. After all, people in vulnerable situations often did strange things. But the more Emma reflected on the conversation, the more unsettled she became. There was something in Mr. Harris's voice that suggested he wasn't just rambling. He seemed absolutely certain about what he had said. And if what he claimed was true, it meant that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. Her thoughts spiraled with questions she couldn't answer. What could this old man possibly have to give her? She had barely known him, just a fleeting interaction in the pharmacy, and yet he seemed to believe there was a profound connection between them. Why her? What could he possibly want from her, or perhaps, what could he possibly see in her? She had always thought of herself as ordinary, nothing special. She had a small circle of friends, a reliable job, and a peaceful, uneventful life. But now, everything was beginning to feel uncertain, as if she had unknowingly stepped onto a path that would inevitably lead to something far bigger. The next day, as she was going about her usual routine, she received another call from Mr. Harris. This time, his voice sounded a little more urgent, though it carried the same warmth she had heard before. "Emma, I'm so glad you picked up. I need to tell you something important, something I should have said earlier. I've been thinking about it, and I don't want to wait any longer." Emma's heart raced at the sound of his voice. "Mr. Harris, what's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her tone calm, though inside, she was a bundle of nerves. "I've made arrangements for you to come and visit me," he continued, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of excitement. "There's something I need to show you. You've been so kind to me, and I want you to see for yourself. You'll understand what I'm talking about when you come. But please, don't tell anyone else just yet. This is between you and me. The time will come when you'll know everything." Emma didn't know what to make of his words, but her curiosity got the best of her. She had always believed in the power of stories, of people's lives intertwining in strange ways. And as improbable as it seemed, a part of her felt that Mr. Harris was speaking the truth, that there was something real behind his cryptic statements. Mr. Harris led her down a narrow hallway, passing through rooms filled with curious trinkets and old paintings. It felt like stepping into a different era, a place frozen in time. The house was clearly old, but well maintained. Finally, they reached a room at the back, a study of sorts, where large leather-bound books lined the shelves. At the center of the room was an old wooden desk, and on it sat a faded piece of paper, tattered and yellowed with age. "I've been keeping this for years," Mr. Harris said, motioning to the paper. "It's been passed down through my family for generations. It's a map, of sorts. It's not like any ordinary map, though. It's a map to something precious, something that could change your life, Emma." She looked at the paper in disbelief. It was a hand-drawn map, the ink faded and the lines uneven. There was no text, only symbols and marks that made no immediate sense to her. But the longer she looked at it, the more she felt that there was something deeply significant about it. Something hidden, something waiting to be uncovered. "Is this what you wanted to show me?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. Mr. Harris nodded. "This is the key, Emma. This map leads to something that has been protected for centuries. Something that my family has guarded for generations. And now, it's yours to discover. The time has come for you to find it." Emma's mind raced as she tried to process what he was saying. What could this old man possibly mean? What was so important about this map that it had been passed down through generations? And why was she, of all people, the one chosen to find it? Her curiosity, already piqued, surged again, stronger than ever. She knew, deep down, that this was the moment her life would change forever. The question was no longer about what might happen next, it was about whether she was willing to take the leap. There was no going back now. The adventure had begun. For several days after that meeting with Mr. Harris, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her life was no longer her own. Every moment seemed laden with possibility, every decision carrying the weight of something larger than herself. The map that Mr. Harris had shown her, an odd, cryptic thing, was now a constant presence in her thoughts. She had examined it, over and over, tracing the jagged lines and strange symbols with her fingertips. The markings didn't make sense, and yet, there was an undeniable sense of urgency that seemed to pulse from the paper itself. It was as though the map was calling her, urging her to uncover its secrets. She knew that Mr. Harris had given her something incredibly important, but what exactly was it? What did it all mean? She spent her days studying the map, trying to make sense of its various symbols. There was a circle drawn near the center of the page, surrounded by a series of interconnected lines that looked like a web. At first glance, it seemed like an abstract piece of art, but as she looked at it more intently, she began to see patterns, connections that were not immediately obvious. The more she stared at it, the more she felt as though something inside her was awakening, as if the map was more than just a guide, it was a key to something within herself, something she hadn't realized she was capable of understanding. But she couldn't figure it out alone. She needed answers. And so, she called Mr. Harris again. It had been a week since their meeting, and though she had tried to piece together the map on her own, she was no closer to unraveling its mystery. There was still so much she didn't understand. As she dialed his number, her mind raced with questions. What had he meant when he said the map led to something that had been protected for centuries? What kind of treasure could it be? Was it money, jewels, or something more profound, something far more valuable than anything she had ever imagined? When Mr. Harris answered, his voice was calm and reassuring, as always. "Emma, I'm glad you called. I knew you would need some guidance with the map. It's not something that can be understood quickly. It's taken me a lifetime to even begin to comprehend it, and I've only scratched the surface myself. But I believe you're ready for the next step." Emma's heart raced at his words. "I've been looking at it, but I don't know what I'm supposed to be seeing. There are so many symbols, and none of it makes sense to me. Can you explain what it all means?" Mr. Harris sighed, the sound thick with the weight of years. "I've been waiting for someone like you, Emma. Someone with an open heart, someone willing to embrace the unknown. This map, it's not just a physical location, it's a map to something far deeper. It represents a path that has been set in motion for generations, a path that leads to knowledge, wisdom, and something far beyond material wealth." Emma felt a thrill run through her. This was no ordinary map. It wasn't about gold or hidden treasure. It was about something much bigger, something that could change everything. "But how do I follow it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if the very words held the power to unravel the mystery. "How do I begin?" "You've already begun," he said softly. "You've already taken the first step. The next part of the journey is about trust. Trust in yourself, and trust in the path that lies ahead. The map will guide you, but it will not give you all the answers right away. It's a process, Emma. And it will test you. But if you're willing to follow it, I believe you'll uncover something extraordinary." That evening, after their conversation, Emma couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, her mind racing with possibilities. What could this extraordinary thing be? Her hands trembled as she reached for the map on her bedside table. The shapes and lines seemed to dance before her eyes in the dim light of her bedroom. She had to know. She had to understand. Without thinking, she stood up, grabbing her coat and the map, and walked out the door into the night. The air was cold, and a light mist hung in the streets, giving everything an ethereal, almost dreamlike quality. The world around her felt strangely still, as though she was walking in a space that was both here and not here. She drove, not really knowing where she was going, but feeling the pull of the map guiding her, as if it were alive in her hands. The road ahead seemed to stretch out endlessly, a path unmarked by the ordinary rules of the world she knew. Eventually, she found herself driving out of the city, into the countryside. Her mind was spinning with questions, and yet, she felt an odd sense of calm. For the first time in days, the tension in her chest loosened, as if this journey, this search for answers, was something she had always been destined for. The map in her lap now felt like a compass, pointing her towards something important, something that had been waiting for her, and now, she was finally ready to find it. After what felt like hours, Emma arrived at a small, secluded spot in the woods. The map's lines seemed to converge at this very location, but there was nothing here, just trees, shadows, and the whisper of the wind. Her heart raced. She had come this far, and yet the place seemed completely ordinary. But the map had led her here, and in her gut, she felt that this was where the real journey would begin. With shaking hands, she stepped out of the car and walked deeper into the woods, following the invisible trail that seemed to pulse beneath her feet. It wasn't just the map guiding her anymore, it was something else. Something intangible that pulled her toward a certain spot, hidden among the trees. The air seemed to grow heavier, more charged, as if the very earth was holding its breath. And then, she saw it, a small stone monument, half hidden by vines and moss. It wasn't much, just a simple structure, but it had an undeniable presence, an ancient energy that she couldn't ignore. She stepped closer, feeling a deep sense of awe settle over her. There was something about this monument that seemed to resonate with her, as if it had been waiting for her arrival. At the base of the stone, she noticed a small indentation, just big enough for her hand. It was smooth and cold to the touch, as though it had been carved for the sole purpose of being opened. Without thinking, she placed her hand into the indentation, and immediately, a low hum seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath her. The air shifted, and the monument began to shift with it. Slowly, the stone moved, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside was a small, intricately carved box, ancient yet untouched by time. Emma's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that would change everything. She opened the box, her hands trembling with anticipation, and inside, she found an old key, its surface worn smooth with age. It was unlike any key she had ever seen, with a symbol carved into its head, an intricate, flowing design that seemed both familiar and foreign. As Emma held the key in her hands, she felt an overwhelming sense of clarity wash over her. The weight of the moment, the significance of it all, finally settled into her bones. She wasn't just holding a key to a box, or a monument, or even to the map she had followed. She was holding the key to a much larger story, one that stretched back generations, one that had begun long before she was born. The key was hers now, and with it, the door to a world she had never known was opening. The answers she had been seeking were within her reach, and everything she thought she knew about her life, her future, was about to change forever. The weight of the key in Emma's hand felt both heavy and light at the same time, as if it were something small and unassuming, yet imbued with a power that could change the course of her life. As she stood there, holding the key to something that had been hidden for centuries, a flood of emotions rushed through her, fear, excitement, curiosity, and an unshakable sense that she was standing on the precipice of something monumental. This key wasn't just a relic, it was a symbol, a key to unlocking not just a physical door, but an entire world of mystery, possibility, and untold stories. For a moment, Emma just stared at the key, her mind swirling with questions. What did it open? What was she supposed to do with it? The answers had to be somewhere, hidden in the history of her family, in the legacy of Mr. Harris, and perhaps, in her own past. But she didn't know where to begin. As much as she had trusted the process so far, this was the point where everything felt too big for her to comprehend alone. The enormity of what lay before her was staggering. The forest around her seemed still, almost eerily quiet. The usual sounds of nature, birds calling, leaves rustling, were absent. It was as if the world itself was waiting, holding its breath, just as she was. She slipped the key into her pocket, unwilling to leave it exposed, and turned back toward her car. There was no immediate destination in mind, but she knew she couldn't stay here in the woods for long. There was more to discover, and she had to be ready. As she drove back to town, her thoughts were a whirl of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to rush back to Mr. Harris, to tell him what she had found, to seek guidance. But another part of her felt a deep, instinctual need to keep moving forward on her own. This journey, this discovery, was hers. She had been chosen for a reason, and she needed to embrace it fully. The map had guided her here, and now the key had shown her the path. Whatever the next step was, it was up to her to take it. When Emma returned home that night, she didn't feel the comfort she usually did. The familiar sights of her apartment, the soft glow of the kitchen light, the cluttered table with its stack of unpaid bills, felt suddenly out of place. The life she had known up until now seemed so small in comparison to the vastness of what she had just encountered. The ordinary world had not only become distant but seemed somehow irrelevant. There was a deeper, more meaningful existence waiting for her to discover, and she wasn't sure how or when it would all unfold, but she knew she couldn't ignore it. She spent the next few days in a daze, unable to focus on anything outside of the mystery she had uncovered. She had gone back to the stone monument several times, but each visit left her with more questions than answers. The key seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, as though it was attuned to something much bigger than Emma herself. She couldn't help but feel that the answer to all her questions lay somewhere just beyond her grasp, but she didn't know where to reach next. Then, one afternoon, she received a call from Mr. Harris. His voice, as usual, was calm and reassuring, but there was a sense of urgency in his tone that made Emma's stomach tighten. "Emma, I've been thinking about you," he said. "You've come so far already, and I'm proud of you. But now it's time for you to truly understand the significance of what you've found." Emma's heart raced. "I've found the key, Mr. Harris. But I don't know what it opens, or where I'm supposed to go next. What am I supposed to do with it?" Mr. Harris paused for a moment before responding. "I knew you'd come to this point. The key is not just a key to a place, it's a key to understanding. Understanding the world around you, understanding the forces that have shaped your life, and understanding the role you're meant to play in something much bigger than yourself. The key opens a door, yes, but not a door to a physical place. It opens the door to a deeper truth, one that has been waiting for you to discover." Emma's mind was racing. "What truth? What do you mean?" "It's about your family, Emma. It's about the legacy that has been passed down through generations. Your ancestors were part of something much greater than just a family. They were custodians of a secret that was meant to be revealed at the right time. And that time is now. You are the one who will unlock it. You are the one who will bring it into the light." The words hit Emma like a wave. She had always known there was something about her family's past that didn't quite add up, but she had never dared to question it. Now, it seemed that everything was connected: her family, Mr. Harris, the key, the map. It was all leading her somewhere, but she couldn't quite see where. "Where do I go next?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if she feared the answer. "Follow the map again," Mr. Harris replied. "It will lead you to a place where you can begin to understand. There is more hidden in the land, more than just the key. The map marks the spot, and once you are there, you'll know what to do. Trust it. Trust yourself." That evening, Emma once again found herself following the map, driving out to the countryside. She didn't know exactly where she was headed, but this time, she felt a sense of certainty she hadn't experienced before. As she approached the edge of town, the world around her seemed to shift, as though it were welcoming her into something new. The fog hung low in the air, swirling in a dance that felt purposeful, almost like the earth itself was guiding her. The map had led her to an old church at the edge of the woods, a place she had driven by countless times but had never really noticed. It was an ancient structure, its stone walls cracked and weathered by time. The church stood as if it were a sentinel, guarding some ancient secret that had been buried for centuries. The door was ajar, creaking slightly as it swayed in the breeze, as though inviting her to enter. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and dust, and the only sound was the soft echo of her footsteps against the stone floor. The church was abandoned, its pews empty, the altar a faint shadow in the distance. But something about the place felt alive, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for her arrival. In the back of the church, near the altar, Emma noticed a small alcove, its entrance concealed by heavy curtains. As she approached, the curtains parted as if by their own volition, revealing a hidden chamber. Inside, an old wooden chest stood at the center of the room, its surface worn and scratched by time. The chest was marked with the same intricate symbol that adorned the key, and Emma's pulse quickened as she stepped closer. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. With trembling hands, she inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, the metal clicking into place with a satisfying sound. She opened the chest, and inside, she found a stack of old papers, a collection of journals, and a small, beautifully carved stone tablet. The journals were worn, the pages yellowed with age, but as she flipped through them, she realized that they were written by someone in her family, her ancestors. The journals chronicled the history of her lineage, their involvement in protecting the secrets of the land, and their duty to preserve the truth for future generations. As Emma read through the journals, she began to piece together the story of her family's legacy, one that had been hidden from her for years. Her ancestors had been part of an ancient order, entrusted with safeguarding knowledge that could change the world. And now, it was her turn to carry that knowledge forward. The key, the map, the chest, it was all leading her to this moment, to this truth. She wasn't just part of her family's history, she was the one chosen to bring it into the light. The future was hers to shape, and as she closed the journals, a deep sense of purpose washed over her. She wasn't just Emma anymore. She was the keeper of a secret that had been passed down through generations. And the world was about to change forever. As Emma stood in the hidden chamber of the old church, the weight of the moment was not lost on her. The journals in her hands felt heavier than they appeared. Each page she turned held fragments of a truth that had been carefully guarded by her ancestors, hidden away in plain sight, waiting for her to unlock it. What began as a chance encounter with Mr. Harris and a mysterious map had now become a journey into a past she never fully understood, a past that was more entwined with her own destiny than she could have ever imagined. The chest, with its delicate carvings in ancient wood, seemed to pulse with an energy that matched her racing heartbeat. The stone tablet that lay inside glinted under the dim light, its surface smooth but etched with symbols she had never seen before. As she carefully picked it up, she could feel the weight of the history it carried, as though the tablet itself had borne witness to countless moments in time. It was clear now that she wasn't just uncovering a family secret, she was unlocking something far larger, something that reached beyond her lineage and into the very fabric of history itself. Emma could feel the air around her grow heavier, thick with the knowledge and power stored in the small stone. It wasn't just an artifact. This tablet, like the key and the map, was a part of a much bigger puzzle, a puzzle that had been centuries in the making, and she was its final piece. The more she held the tablet, the more she understood that she wasn't simply a passive observer in this story. She was the catalyst, the one who would bring everything into motion. But what was this greater mystery? What could her ancestors have been guarding so fiercely, and why had they chosen her to carry it forward? She thought back to Mr. Harris's words, his cryptic comments about her being chosen and how the time for revelation was now. She had always wondered about the strange sense of connection she had with certain places, people, and moments in her life. It was as if something deep within her had been waiting to awaken, but it wasn't until now, in this ancient church, that the answers were starting to emerge. The journal she had been reading contained the key to the answers she sought. Her ancestors had been custodians of an ancient knowledge, passed down from generation to generation. But they were not just keepers of physical artifacts or obscure maps. They were protectors of something far greater, an understanding of the world and its hidden forces, a wisdom that had been almost entirely forgotten by the modern world. The secret they guarded was not just a legacy, it was a living, breathing entity, something that held the power to shape the course of history. This knowledge had been carefully concealed, tucked away in secret locations known only to the family, protected by codes, symbols, and hidden languages that could only be deciphered by someone truly worthy. As Emma sifted through the journals, she found references to an ancient society, one that had operated in the shadows of history, influencing events and decisions in ways that no one had ever suspected. It was a society bound not by wealth or politics but by a shared understanding of the forces that shaped the universe itself, forces that most people would never understand. And her family had been its stewards, entrusted with safeguarding this profound wisdom, passing it down with the hope that one day, it would be revealed to someone capable of carrying it forward. That someone, it seemed, was her. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. The key, the map, the journals, and the tablet, everything had been leading to this moment. She was standing on the threshold of a revelation that would change everything. The world she knew, the life she had built for herself in the city, all seemed irrelevant in the face of what she was about to discover. The power and responsibility of what she now knew weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she also felt a sense of peace, a deep knowing that this was exactly what she was meant to do. The stone tablet was her next step. The symbols carved into its surface were unfamiliar, but as she ran her fingers over them, she felt a strange connection, a pull as if the tablet itself was alive, guiding her to the next piece of the puzzle. The more she touched the symbols, the more they began to shift and change beneath her fingertips. It was as though they were responding to her presence, revealing themselves in a way they never had before. She knew then that the tablet was more than just a key, it was a living document, a link between the past and the future, a bridge between the ancient knowledge her ancestors had preserved and the world she was about to enter. But what did it all mean? What was the secret she had uncovered, and why had it been hidden for so long? She looked at the journal again, flipping through the pages with a sense of urgency, knowing that every word written here was a clue, a piece of the puzzle that would lead her to the final revelation. Her ancestors had written about the moment when everything would come to light, when the world would be ready for the knowledge they had safeguarded. It had always been part of their plan for the future, a plan they had passed down through generations, waiting for the right person to uncover it all. And now that person was her. Emma's head swam with the enormity of it all, but she couldn't allow herself to be overwhelmed. She needed to focus. She needed to understand what she had to do next. The journal spoke of a final destination, a place where the knowledge would be unlocked completely, where the forces that had guided her family for centuries would finally be revealed to the world. It wasn't in some faraway land, some hidden temple, or ancient ruin, it was here, in her own town. The key to the final secret lay within the town she had always called home. Suddenly, it all made sense. She had been following the map without truly understanding its significance, but now she realized that the map had always been a guide to the hidden aspects of her own life, to the places and people she had always known but never truly understood. The church, the monument in the woods, the key, the journals, they were all parts of a larger design that had been unfolding for generations. And now it was her turn to step into the center of it all, to reveal the final truth. She quickly gathered the journals, the stone tablet, and the key, and left the church. As she drove back through the town, she could see everything with new eyes. The streets she had walked down 1,000 times, the buildings she had passed by without a second glance, they were all part of a larger, hidden world. She had been living in the shadow of something extraordinary, and now, it was time for her to step into the light. She arrived at the place the journals had described, a small, unassuming building at the edge of town. It was an old library, one she had visited as a child but had long since forgotten about. As she entered, she was greeted by the musty smell of old books and the faint hum of history that seemed to permeate the air. The librarian, an elderly woman who had always seemed a little too curious for Emma's liking, smiled at her warmly. "You've come," she said, as though she had been expecting Emma all along. Emma's heart skipped a beat. I don't understand. How did you know I was coming?" The librarian's smile deepened. "I've known about you for a long time, Emma. Your family's legacy, the knowledge they've guarded, it's all here. And now, you're ready to take it. You're the one who will unlock the final door." The librarian led her to a back room, where a hidden door opened into a long-forgotten part of the library, a place that had been sealed off for generations. Inside was a vast archive, filled with ancient manuscripts, scrolls, and artifacts, everything her ancestors had preserved, everything they had protected. And now, it was hers to uncover. In the heart of the archive, Emma found a final journal, one that seemed to shimmer with an energy of its own. As she opened it, she saw the final instructions, the last piece of the puzzle. The knowledge was not just for her, it was for the world. The time had come for the secrets to be revealed, for the knowledge her family had guarded for so long to finally change the course of history. With the journal in her hands and the key to the final door, Emma stepped into her destiny. The world was about to be forever changed, and she was the one who would unlock the future.